What if the biggest change in your life didn't begin the day you succeeded, but the day you stopped asking for permission to become yourself? Think about it. Have you noticed that certain people seem strangely uncomfortable around you lately? Conversations end differently. Some relationships have quietly disappeared. The opinions that once controlled you suddenly feel meaningless. It almost feels as if something invisible has shifted, not around you but within you. Most people would call it coincidence. Psychology calls it identity transformation. Throughout history, there have been rare moments when individuals broke free from the invisible limits that shaped everyone else. To those around them, they looked unpredictable, even dangerous. Not because they possessed supernatural powers, but because they could no longer be controlled by fear. The question isn't whether this force exists. The question is, have you already awakened it without realizing it? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may completely change the way you understand your own mind. Before we begin, if you're passionate about psychology, mindset, and unlocking the hidden potential of the human mind, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every week, we explore the ideas that transform ordinary thinking into extraordinary living. Now, let's uncover the hidden force that's been waiting inside you all along. Every generation believes it understands human potential. Every generation is wrong. Not because people lack intelligence, but because every era builds invisible rules about what is considered possible. Those rules become so deeply accepted that questioning them feels irrational. Over time, those invisible boundaries stop being cultural beliefs and become personal prisons. Most people never notice this happening. They grow up absorbing expectations without realizing it. They're told what success should look like, how they should behave, what dreams are realistic, what ambitions are too much. Slowly, the most dangerous sentence in the world becomes part of their identity. People like me don't do things like that. That single belief has quietly buried more potential than failure ever has. What's fascinating is that the human brain actually prefers predictable limitation over uncertain freedom. Neuroscientists have discovered that the brain is designed to conserve energy. Familiar habits, familiar beliefs, and familiar routines require very little mental effort. But the moment you challenge an old identity, your brain reacts as though it's facing a threat. That's why real transformation often feels uncomfortable before it feels empowering. The fear isn't coming from reality. It's coming from the part of your mind trying to protect the version of yourself it already understands. This is where something extraordinary begins to happen. There comes a point in life, sometimes after heartbreak, sometimes after betrayal, failure, loneliness, or complete exhaustion, when the old identity simply stops working. You can no longer pretend. You can no longer shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You can no longer live according to expectations that were never truly yours. To the outside world, it looks like you've changed, but psychologically, you've actually stopped pretending. Carl Jung once described this process as confronting the hidden parts of yourself, the parts you've ignored because they didn't fit the image the world expected you to maintain. It's uncomfortable because you're not just discovering new strengths, you're letting old versions of yourself disappear. And every identity resists its own death. This explains something almost everyone experiences during personal growth. The moment you begin thinking differently, your environment reacts. Some friends disappear. Some conversations become awkward. People who once understood you suddenly say, "You've changed." They're right. You have. But not in the way they think. You've stopped organizing your life around other people's expectations. Psychologists refer to this as identity restructuring. It's one of the most powerful transformations a human being can experience. Because once your identity changes, your decisions change, your habits change, your standards change, your relationships change. Eventually, your entire future changes. Most people think success changes people. The truth is exactly the opposite. People change first. Success simply reveals who they've already become. Think about every remarkable person in history. Before anyone admired them, they experienced isolation, not because they were better than everyone else, because they had begun seeing the world differently. Vision almost always creates loneliness before it creates influence. The difficult part is that loneliness tricks you into believing you're going the wrong way. Human beings evolved to survive in groups. For thousands of years, being rejected by your tribe often meant death. Even today, that ancient survival system still exists inside your nervous system. That's why criticism feels physical. That's why rejection hurts. That's why misunderstanding can feel almost unbearable. Your brain isn't just processing opinions. It's responding to an ancient survival alarm. But here's the paradox. Everything extraordinary requires temporarily stepping outside the tribe. Innovation, leadership, art, discovery, personal freedom. None of them begin with agreement. They begin with separation. The people who reshape history don't first receive permission. They first receive resistance. Resistance isn't always evidence you're wrong. Sometimes it's evidence you're leaving familiar territory. Imagine climbing a mountain covered in thick fog. The higher you climb, the fewer people remain beside you. Not because the path disappears, because most people stop climbing. If you looked around in that moment, you might believe you were lost. In reality, you were simply willing to continue where others became comfortable. This is why genuine transformation feels so unusual. You're not just changing your circumstances, you're changing the operating system of your mind. Old fears lose their authority. Old habits begin falling away. Old goals no longer excite you. A completely different version of yourself quietly starts taking control. At first, it's almost invisible. You notice you're reacting differently. You don't argue as much. You don't seek validation the way you used to. Certain people no longer intimidate you. Silence becomes more valuable than proving a point. Peace becomes more attractive than approval. Without realizing it, you've activated something that has always existed inside you. Not magic, not mystery, awareness. The awareness that your greatest limitation was never the world around you. It was the identity you believed you had to protect. And once that identity begins to dissolve, something remarkable replaces it. A quiet confidence, a calm certainty, a presence that doesn't demand attention, yet somehow commands it. People begin noticing. Not because you're louder, because you're different. You no longer react the way they expect. You no longer fear what once controlled you. And that's exactly when the world begins treating you differently. But what most people never realize is that this transformation follows a hidden psychological pattern that's been repeating for centuries. And once you recognize that pattern, you'll never look at your own life the same way again. There is a moment in every genuine transformation that almost no one talks about. It isn't the breakthrough. It isn't the success. It isn't the confidence. It's the confusion. Because before your new identity becomes clear, your old identity begins falling apart. And that space between the two versions of yourself can feel terrifying. Imagine standing on a bridge that's collapsing behind you while the bridge ahead hasn't been built yet. That's exactly how psychological transformation feels. You're no longer the person you used to be, but you haven't fully become the person you're capable of becoming. Most people mistake this season for failure. They think they're lost. In reality, they're being rebuilt. Psychologists call this identity reconstruction. It's one of the most emotionally demanding experiences a human being can go through, because your brain isn't simply learning new information. It's rewriting the story you've believed about yourself for years. Think about the labels you've carried. I'm too quiet. I'm not a leader. I'm always unlucky. I'm not creative. I'm not disciplined. I'm just an average person. At first, they sound harmless. Eventually, they become invisible laws. And here's something extraordinary. The human brain doesn't work to discover reality. It works to confirm identity. If you've believed you're not confident, your brain will unconsciously search for evidence proving that belief. Every mistake becomes proof. Every rejection becomes confirmation. Every criticism becomes another brick reinforcing the same prison. This is called confirmation bias. It's one of the strongest psychological forces shaping human behavior. People don't usually see the world as it is. They see the world as they believe they are. That's why two people can experience the exact same failure. One decides, I'll learn from this. The other decides, I knew I wasn't good enough. The event is identical. The identity creates the meaning. Now imagine what happens the moment that identity begins changing. Suddenly, failure becomes feedback. Rejection becomes redirection. Silence becomes peace. Uncertainty becomes possibility. Nothing outside changed. Everything inside did. This is why some people seem to transform almost overnight. The world says they got lucky. Psychology says they changed the lens through which they interpret reality. Because your mind doesn't simply react to life. It creates your experience of life. Here's where it becomes fascinating. When your identity starts expanding, your nervous system becomes uncomfortable. Not because growth is dangerous, because growth is unfamiliar. Your body often mistakes unfamiliar experiences for unsafe experiences. That's why people sabotage themselves right before major breakthroughs. A better opportunity appears. They procrastinate. A healthier relationship enters their life. They push the person away. A new business begins succeeding. They suddenly become afraid. It looks irrational. It's actually predictable. The subconscious always tries to return to what's familiar, even if what's familiar is painful. Read that again. Human beings often choose familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom. Not because they enjoy suffering, because certainty feels safer than possibility. This explains why so many people remain trapped in lives they secretly dislike. The job they complain about, the relationship they've already outgrown, the habits that slowly destroy their confidence. They're painful, but they're predictable. And predictability gives the brain a false sense of security. Then one day, something shifts. Not because someone motivates you, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you're finally more afraid of staying the same than changing. That single moment changes everything. The fear doesn't disappear, it simply changes direction. Instead of fearing the unknown, you begin fearing wasted potential. Instead of fearing failure, you begin fearing regret. And regret is one of the strongest emotional forces in human psychology. Studies consistently show that as people grow older, they rarely regret the risks they took. They regret the dreams they ignored, the conversations they avoided, the opportunities they postponed, the life they were too afraid to live. That's why awareness is so powerful. Once you truly see your own patterns, you can't unsee them. You begin noticing how often fear disguised itself as logic, how often comfort disguised itself as wisdom, how often doubt disguised itself as humility. Suddenly, you realize your biggest obstacle was never external. It was internal. The voice that constantly whispered, maybe you're not enough. But here's the truth. That voice was never your enemy. It was an outdated survival mechanism. It learned to protect you from embarrassment, from rejection, from disappointment. It believed playing small would keep you safe. The problem is, what protects you at 16 can imprison you at 30. Growth requires updating your internal operating system. You cannot build an extraordinary future using ordinary beliefs. Eventually, something incredible begins happening. People notice you before you speak, not because you've become louder, because certainty has its own energy. Real confidence doesn't demand attention. It naturally attracts it. Have you ever met someone who walked into a room without trying to impress anyone, yet somehow everyone noticed them? It wasn't appearance, it wasn't status, it wasn't money, it was congruence. Everything about them matched: their words, their actions, their identity, their values, their presence. Human beings instinctively trust congruent people, because authenticity is rare. Most people spend years performing, trying to become someone they think they'll be accepted for becoming. The irony: the moment you stop performing, people finally start seeing you. Not everyone will celebrate that transformation. Some people benefited from your insecurity. Some people felt comfortable while you doubted yourself. Some people liked the version of you that constantly asked for permission. When you stop doing that, their relationship with you changes. Don't take it personally. Growth naturally reveals who is connected to your potential and who is connected to your limitations. That realization can feel lonely, but loneliness during transformation is not punishment, it's preparation. Because the next version of your life cannot always be built with the same mindset or the same people that created the previous one. And yet, there is one final psychological barrier that almost everyone encounters before their transformation becomes permanent. It's invisible, it's powerful, and most people never realize it's controlling them. Because the greatest prison isn't fear, it's something far more convincing. It's the need to be accepted. And until that need is broken, true freedom remains impossible. There comes a point in every transformation where the battle is no longer between you and the world. It's between you and the version of yourself that still wants everyone to approve of you. Most people never realize how much of their life is built around one invisible question. What will they think of me? It sounds harmless. But that single question has stopped more dreams than failure ever could. Think about it. How many times have you stayed quiet even though you knew you were right? How many opportunities have you ignored because someone might laugh? How many goals have you postponed because they didn't fit other people's expectations? The tragedy isn't that people judge you. The tragedy is that you begin judging yourself before anyone else has the chance. Psychologists call this social conditioning. From childhood, we're rewarded for fitting in. Raise your hand before speaking. Don't be different. Don't make mistakes. Don't stand out too much. Little by little, acceptance becomes addictive. Without realizing it, we begin measuring our worth through other people's reactions. A compliment feels like proof we're valuable. A criticism feels like proof we're not. But here's the problem. If someone else controls how valuable you feel, they also control how you live. And that's exactly why so many intelligent people spend decades living lives they never actually wanted. Not because they lacked ability, because they feared rejection more than regret. The human brain evolved inside tribes. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your tribe could mean starvation. Isolation often meant death. That ancient survival system still lives inside your nervous system. Today, nobody is throwing you out of the village, but your brain reacts as if they are. That's why criticism feels personal. That's why embarrassment feels overwhelming. That's why one negative comment can stay in your mind for weeks while 10 compliments disappear within minutes. Your brain isn't trying to make you successful, it's trying to keep you accepted. But acceptance and greatness rarely arrive together. Every remarkable person eventually reaches a crossroads. One road leads toward comfort, the other leads toward authenticity. Comfort says, stay where everyone understands you. Authenticity whispers, become who you were meant to be. Only one of those paths creates peace. Here's something fascinating. The people who seem fearless aren't actually fearless. They've simply changed the source of their approval. Instead of asking, do they believe in me? They ask, am I becoming the person I respect? That one shift changes everything. Because self-respect is infinitely more stable than public approval. Public opinion changes every day. Character doesn't. Think about the people history remembers. Were they universally loved? Almost never. Some were criticized, some were mocked, some were ignored, some were called dangerous. Yet they kept moving. Not because everyone believed in them. Because they believed in the direction they were walking. This is why confidence isn't loud. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't chase validation. It simply continues. Notice something about truly confident people. They don't waste energy convincing everyone they're right. They let time do the convincing. Results speak with a voice opinions can never match. Unfortunately, most people never stay committed long enough to experience that moment. Why? Because they confuse silence with failure. Imagine planting a tree. For months, nothing seems to happen. No branches, no shade, very little visible growth. Would you dig it up every week to check whether it's growing? Of course not. Yet that's exactly what people do with their dreams. They expect immediate proof, immediate applause, immediate success, and when those things don't arrive, they assume nothing is happening. But transformation works underground first. Roots always grow before branches. Identity always changes before circumstances. The strongest foundations are invisible. This is where patience becomes a superpower, not passive waiting, active becoming. Every day you choose discipline over distraction, you're changing. Every time you tell yourself the truth instead of another excuse, you're changing. Every difficult conversation you finally have, you're changing. Every boundary you set, every fear you face, every promise you keep to yourself, you're becoming someone your old identity would never recognize. And that's exactly why some people begin drifting away. They're not rejecting the real you. They're grieving the version of you they were comfortable with. Growth always rearranges relationships. Some people are meant to walk with you for a season. Others are meant to witness your transformation from a distance. Neither is wrong, it's simply life making room for the next version of you. Here's the irony. The less you chase acceptance, the more respect you naturally earn. Why? Because authenticity is magnetic. People trust those who trust themselves, not arrogance, not ego, inner certainty. You can feel it when someone has it. They enter a room without trying to impress anyone. They speak without needing everyone to agree. They listen without becoming defensive. They disagree without becoming hostile. They've discovered something most people never learn. Peace doesn't come from winning every argument. It comes from no longer needing to. That kind of emotional freedom changes everything. You stop comparing your timeline to everyone else's. You stop measuring your life through social media. You stop chasing status symbols that never actually satisfied you. You begin asking a different question. What kind of person am I becoming? And strangely, that's the moment life begins opening doors you never expected. Because your energy changes, not mystical energy, psychological energy. People notice calm, they notice authenticity, they notice consistency. Those qualities communicate something words never can. They say, this person knows who they are, and the world responds differently to people who know who they are. But even after all of this, there is still one final lesson waiting. One lesson that separates temporary confidence from unshakable purpose. Because the ultimate goal was never becoming stronger than the people who doubted you. The ultimate goal was becoming stronger than the doubts that once lived inside you. And when that happens, you'll discover something that very few people ever experience. A freedom that cannot be given and can never be taken away. There is a moment in every extraordinary life that almost nobody notices. It doesn't happen when the money arrives. It doesn't happen when the promotion comes. It doesn't happen when strangers finally begin applauding your success. It happens much earlier. It happens the first time you look in the mirror and realize you no longer recognize the person who used to live in fear. That is the real awakening. Because the greatest transformation is never external, it's internal. For years you believed life was happening to you. Then one day, you understand that life has been responding to you all along. Not to your wishes, not to your dreams, not even to your goals. It has been responding to your identity. Everything changes the moment your identity changes. Think about how different your decisions become. You no longer say yes just to avoid disappointing people. You no longer apologize for having ambition. You no longer explain your vision to people who have already decided they won't understand it. You stop asking for permission. And something remarkable happens. The energy you've been searching for doesn't suddenly appear. It was always there. Hidden beneath years of fear, years of self-doubt, years of living for approval instead of purpose. The moment those layers begin falling away, your natural confidence finally has room to breathe. This is why people often say, you've changed. They're right. But they misunderstand what changed. You didn't become someone new. You became someone real. Psychology teaches us that every human being wears masks. Masks created by family expectations, masks created by school, by rejection, by heartbreak, by failure, by society. For so long, those masks feel like our identity. Until one day, life forces us to ask a painful question. If no one expected anything from me, who would I become? A very few people are brave enough to answer it. Because the answer requires letting go of the person you've spent years pretending to be. But that's where freedom begins. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want. Freedom is no longer needing to become someone else to feel worthy. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day for 20 years. Eventually it becomes normal, you forget how heavy it is. Then one morning, you finally take it off. The world hasn't become lighter, you have. That's exactly what happens when you release old fears, limiting beliefs, and borrowed identities. Nothing magical has happened, yet everything feels different. Because your mind is finally working with you, instead of against you. The beautiful irony is this. The more authentic you become, the less energy you waste pretending. You stop trying to impress people who were never meant to understand you. You stop chasing validation that never truly satisfied you. You stop comparing your journey to people walking completely different paths. Instead, you begin competing with only one person, the person you were yesterday. That is the healthiest competition in existence, because it creates growth without envy, progress without insecurity, purpose without comparison. And here's something most people discover too late. Success isn't measured by how many people admire you. It's measured by how peacefully you sleep at night. Can you look at yourself honestly? Can you keep your promises to yourself? Can you walk away from what no longer serves you? Can you remain kind without becoming weak? Can you remain ambitious without becoming arrogant? Those questions matter far more than followers, titles, or applause. Because character is what remains after everything else disappears. Life has an interesting habit. Just when you think you've reached your highest level, it invites you to grow again. Another challenge appears, another fear, another opportunity, another version of yourself waiting to be discovered. Growth never ends, and that's a beautiful thing. Because the purpose of life isn't to arrive, it's to evolve, to become a little wiser, a little calmer, a little stronger, every single day. One day people will ask, how did you become so confident? They'll think it happened overnight. They'll see the calm in your voice, the certainty in your decisions, the peace in your presence. But they'll never see the invisible battles, the nights you questioned yourself, the mornings you chose discipline over comfort, the moments you almost gave up and decided to continue anyway. They'll call it talent. You'll know it was transformation. They'll call it luck. You'll know it was consistency. They'll call it confidence. You'll know it was thousands of quiet choices that nobody applauded, and maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. The strongest people aren't those who never struggle. They're the ones who refuse to let struggle define them. They understand something most people never do. Pain is temporary. Growth is permanent. Fear is temporary. Character is permanent. Opinions are temporary. Purpose is permanent. So if you've been feeling different lately, if you've outgrown people, habits, or beliefs that once defined you, don't panic. You're not losing yourself. You're finally meeting yourself. The world doesn't need another copy of someone else. It needs the version of you that no longer hides behind fear. Because history has never been changed by people who waited for permission. It has always been changed by ordinary people who finally believed they no longer needed it. So protect your peace. Trust your growth. Honor your vision. Keep moving when nobody understands. Keep building when nobody applauds. Keep believing when results are still invisible. Because one day, you'll look back and realize something extraordinary. The greatest energy you activated was never some ancient force hidden in history. It was the courage to stop living as the person fear created one, and finally become the person purpose was calling you to be all along. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you see yourself in a new light, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs this message today. Sometimes one idea, one decision, or one moment of courage is enough to change an entire life. The greatest awakening isn't discovering a hidden power, it's discovering the person you were always capable of becoming.